The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi traders, welcome to the live webinar with Admiral Markets. My name is Chris and today's focus is on pivot points. How can we use them for improving our trading decisions and exits and entries, etc. So that's the topic of today. Before we take a look at the slides and charts, please be aware of these two disclaimers. First of all, the fact that this webinar is shown to a global audience doesn't mean it's necessarily suitable for everyone. Please visit admiralmarketsglobal.com, select your country of residence, and contact an appropriate entity to find out if it is suitable for you. Also, please note that trading for exchange and global financial markets is considered high risk. Please seek the advice of an independent financial advisor for more information on that. This webinar is for informational and educational purposes only. By continuing watching this webinar, you agree with this disclaimer and you are aware of the risk involved when trading. Alrighty, so using the pivot point. So there are a couple of things that the pivot point is critical for, maybe more than that, but here are at least a few of them. I'm a big fan of pivot points. Nenet too. We both use pivot points regularly, frequently, for a long time, and they provide a lot of value. Now, is it impossible to trade without them? I don't think so. I think that, of course, you might find systems that don't have them, don't need them, but generally speaking, very good for intraday, very good for intra-week, maybe even intra-month. Because pivot points can be daily, weekly, monthly, even hourly. I think exist. I don't use pivot points on such a low time frame, but I think that they're even hourly as well. So they give value by showing support and resistance. Obviously, that's the first thing. They show where you might expect price to bounce or break, but they're a decision zone. They add confluence to the chart. You can basically use pivot points together with other support and resistance levels to find a confluence zone where you expect price to stop or where you expect price to break. So they're useful for that. They're also beneficial to understand the space on the chart. And also the trend. So if price is below S1, you know that there is a downtrend going on at that moment. If price is above the R1, price is trending up. But you also understand the space. You also understand that the difference between price moving from S1 to S2, that's a zone where price usually moves up without hesitating too much. It is not certain, of course, that price will hit S2. There are mid-pivot points as well that are important, but there's a fair chance that once price breaks S1, it will go to the mid-pivot and then after that to S2. That's just statistically pretty likely. Same thing for R1 to R2 or from R2 to R3. So these are like spaces on the chart that are trending zones, and you can capitalize on that by trading with the trend into these zones and aiming for take profits at the next pivot point or the one after that. Of course, you can use multiple pivot point time frames. You could use a daily and a weekly to find confluence for targets or find confluence for the zone that you're looking for. So that's useful. I think that understanding where the space is on the chart is very beneficial for trend traders and reversal traders for that matter. So the pivot point provides that structure and shows you what you could expect during that week or day. If price is between the S1 and R1, of course, that's a little bit more range territory, but that's also good to know. So very useful. It also basically helps with entries and exits and avoiding entries that might have worse probability. So filtering setups basically. Because if you want to take a long right into a R3, well, if you know that the R3 is there, you would probably avoid it. It will help you make a better judgment about that trade idea, and you'll probably come to the conclusion that that might be a good idea to skip it. I mean, not always, by the way. It really depends on circumstances. I'm just giving you a hypothetical example. But with that said, let's move on and take a look at the real charts, because I think that is always has the best value. So let's do that. All right, there we go. So what you see here is the weekly pivot point. That's my favorite because I'm prefer to trade swing setups, basically 4-hour chart, 1-hour chart. I think weekly pivot point is the most useful for that. If you trade maybe daily charts, you could find it useful to trade maybe monthly pivot points. If you trade 50-minute charts, then intraday pivot points are useful. So how do you get the pivot point, first of all? So what you want to do, one of the ways you can get a pivot point is by using Admiral Markets pivot point from the MetaTrader Supreme Edition. It is both valid for MT4 and MT5. The Supreme Edition, or SE is the abbreviation, has pivot points as one of the indicators that is added. All you need to do is download it for free. Go to the indicator folders here, Navigator, scroll up to find Admiral. It starts with the A, find pivot. Click with the left mouse, drag onto the chart, let go, click which time frame you want, M1, M5, H1, H4, etc., and then click yes. All right. But there's some other settings as well, by the way, you might want to look into, but you could just leave the rest, I guess, as it is. You can change colors, etc. So that's just one of them. As you can see, there are many more indicators. The Keltner is one of them I often refer to and use, but there are more than that. There are also, besides indicators, at the very bottom, if you would look at expert advisors, there are also other things like matrices and sentiment traders, trade terminals, trading simulators. As you can see, there are also different tools besides indicators. There are also EAs available. All right, so that's very useful. So let's take a look at the levels themselves. Let me get rid of the fib, or let me just do this again. There we go. Alrighty, now we don't see the pivot points from last week, but this week started, let's see, on this day. All right, so we basically see price below the pivot point. So we could already be, one conclusion is that we're more bearish oriented. It didn't hit the weekly pivot point, but it came close to it, about less than 20 pips away from it. So we know that price is running into a resistance zone, right, at the weekly pivot point, if it's moving into it like that. So that's another thing we can conclude. When price breaks the S1, as I said, there's space down to S2. So was a trend continuation. So there's already 3 practical ways that that you could have used the weekly pivot points. I think these are weekly, for understanding how to understand the chart better. Sorry. So on a 4-hour chart, for instance, right, we can see that here running into resistance. We're in a downtrend. We're below the weekly pivot point, so we're looking for with the trend setups. And there are other ways of determining the trend, of course. Moving average. You can add the Keltner and look at the middle part of the Keltner, this blue line, that's equal to a 20 EMA, and you can see that price is neatly following that. Right? So when you see prices at the middle of the middle of the Keltner, which is the 20 EMA, below the weekly pivot point, very highly likely chance that the trend will continue. And it made a good 180 pip fall. It broke below the S1 with good candles here. So maybe you wouldn't trade it on a 4-hour chart, but maybe on a lower time frame, you could look for continuations to the downside. Maybe on an hourly chart, for instance, you see a wick here, you see a break of the S1, you see a pullback and a wick here. So that could have been maybe a setup to trade for another 75 pips to the downside, for instance, right? So those all help with analyzing this chart, as you can see. Let's take a look at one more. Alrighty. 4-hour chart, pound CAD, for instance, same thing. Price below the weekly pivot point, below the Keltner channel. Now, of course, between the R1 and S1, it's not fully trending, but especially if you see price, visually in a trend like this already, in the sense that price has broken below this support, and we have clearly lower lows and lower highs like that. It doesn't hurt to trade down to the S1 even from the weekly pivot point, for instance. Now, price opened about halfway the pivot point in S1, so that's a little bit more tricky spot. And I wouldn't trade it on a 4-hour chart here because of that, personally. But maybe tradable on lower time frames, like for instance on a 50-minute chart, if you get a breakout. So for instance here, this setup right here, right? If you use this as a stop loss above these tops like this, and you put the stop loss somewhere here, and you aim for the S1, it could be still a setup. Oh, there we go. It could still be a setup when price breaks this candle, this trend line, right? It could still be a setup for a downside that is worth thinking about. So you can use pivot points in different ways. You can use it for different trading ideas. Sometimes you can conclude maybe that on this time frame there is no trade. Like for me, the 4-hour chart, it's too far from the weekly pivot point. I would be scared that price could still retest that level for downside. So I wouldn't trade it on a 4-hour chart. But a breakout continuation on a lower time frame could make sense, down to the S1. And if S1 breaks, down to the S2. So it gives you a better feel for the market structure, for the space, for where's confluence, where's support or resistance. Excuse me. Now let's add different pivot points. This is, I think, weekly, but or let me remove these first. Hang on. Excuse me. You see, these are daily, so those were weekly indeed. All right, so these are the daily levels. I'm not sure if I can have both at the same time. Let's see. Yes, I can. Great. So now you can see the weekly level. It says weekly S2. Daily pivot point is just above it. All right, so if it breaks above that, there could be maybe a counter trend trade. I don't know. It's risky, of course, because it's in a downtrend, but it's kind of a corrective pattern. And if it breaks, there is a chance it can go up to the S1, retest that broken support and the R2, R3 area. It's a risky analysis, but it's possible. Of course, then again, if it breaks through the S2, then there's space down to the S3 daily, maybe even the S3 weekly. But today is Friday, today's NFP, so it might extend further than the daily S3, could go down to weekly S3, but then close in reverse maybe and end up somewhere here halfway again, for instance, right? Quite a volatile day today could be because of that. So this is how you can use these levels to get a little bit of a feeling for what kind of direction you're looking at, what position on the chart you are. You know you're at the S2, you know you're at in a trend to the downside, but the S2 is already a spot where a bounce could happen. Then again, an extension to S3 is possible. So you're aware that a breakout trade here could be interesting. Right? Let's add one more pivot point for the fun of it. Let's add hourly. I talked about it already before. All right, and there you go. Even smaller, right? You hardly see it on this chart because of the other pivot points. But let's take a look at the 50-minute chart. You might see it a bit better. All right, there we go. And you see R3, you need to break above the R3 on the hourly pivot, probably for a breakout to the upside there that I was talking about of the daily pivots, right? These are hourly pivots once again. All right, very much clustered, of course, but might give you an idea about the breakout or the failure to break as price is going sideways if it stays around this area. S3 could be a breakout to the downside. So this is how you can use pivots on all different levels for different purposes. Let's take a look at monthly. Alrighty, and there we go. So not only do we have weekly pivots, right, which I'm not even sure are, I think, these, but we have now monthly pivots, right, added to it, which is all the way here, R3, S3, those are the wider ones, and price is now just started. I guess we'll have to redo this template. 1 second. It's difficult to see it. There we go. Month just started, of course. May just started. April just ended. And price is right at the S1 already. That too could be a bounce or break spot. If it breaks down to S2, if it bounces, maybe rally up to the weekly pivot point, for instance. So that is using monthly pivots. So you can use all these pivot points at different time frames for different purposes. The S1 we know could be a bouncing spot and we are on a S2 weekly, S1 monthly. So it's a strong support zone. So not an area that we should necessarily underestimate, right? So this could definitely be a zone to be careful of, and shorting it right now is dangerous because price could bounce. All right. Do you have any particular currency pair in mind, or other financial instrument, of course? All right. Let me know if you have any preference. We can take a look at this WTI oil. All right, and there we go. We're using weekly pivot points. I basically still use the 4-hour charts for that. All right, and you can see that price in this last week has used the pivot points and stayed basically between S1 and R1. So it has been ranging this week. It came close to bouncing at the S1, then bounced at R1, then bounced at S1, bounced at S1. Had a bounce at pivot, and now maybe again pivot. Now, definitely a ranging week, obviously. It has been already in range the week before that. And you can use those weekly pivot points also for a bounce setup. A bounce at these levels using candlestick patterns on lower time frames, or maybe wicks or reversal patterns, etc. Or even lower time frames to wait for reactions at these levels. Now, I personally don't use this for range trading. I'm just observing that oil is in between these levels and that these levels were nicely respected. But I personally don't trade ranges, but you can see that didn't work all too bad, did it? So in any case, it's useful for understanding the trend. At this moment, I don't think there is much of a trend on this weekly, and as I said, understanding confluence, etc. Pound dollar, let's take a look. Sorry. There we go. Price is at weekly S2 and made a good continuation as well. Good trend. Continuation. This could be a tough spot for price at S2, but NFP could send it to S3 too. It is at a decision spot. And with regard to the monthly pivot points, it's also at S2 apparently. I wonder if this is not the same. 1 second. Maybe I made a mistake. Yeah, sorry, I made a mistake. All right. It is at the S1 of a monthly, as you can see here. So monthly S1, weekly S2, pretty strong zone around 135. That might be difficult to break. All right, but the month just started, so price could eventually break through the S1. It doesn't have to be this today. It doesn't have to be this week. This is monthly pivot points. They just started, as I mentioned, so there's a whole month left. So that break of S1, I think, will happen eventually, and then there's space down to S2 and S3. Just not sure whether there could be first some correction taking place first. That could take price back to the weekly pivot point, but that I think is a good chance that could be a turning spot for indeed a move down to S2, probably S3. All right, but I don't know if monthly pivot points, how accurately they work. I primarily use weekly, as I already indicated, but you can use pivot points from higher time frames and lower time frames for different purposes. For confluence here, if you're looking for a break to the down or upside, you can use hourly pivot points, right? Probably to understand where those breakout levels are, I can imagine. All right, but I'm personally, in my trading, I only use weekly pivot points. So my experience is limited to that, but you can experiment with other time frames and see how you can use that for confluence. If you use weekly pivot points for 1 hour and 1 hour swing trading, you would see basically that pound dollar had a good breakouts and continuations. If you use intraday trading and you use pivot points for daily pivot points, right? We don't see yesterday, but so not sure, unfortunately. But this is how today would look like in any case. Daily pivot point is just a little bit higher. Price stop there, in fact. Break above that, might see a retracement down up to R1 or R2, for instance. Break of S1, and we might see a continuation down to S2/S3. I think both are probably just as effective. I just have more experience with weekly, but many traders use daily, Nana too. I think they both have their value. It all depends on how you trade, which time frames you trade, and that is actually probably more important for you than that's the most important in your choice. I mean, if you're trading 15-minute charts, I would use daily probably. You can always use weekly as an extra, of course. It's okay, I think, as an extra confluence as well. If you're using 4 hour, I would choose weekly. If you're using 1 hour, you could maybe use both, right? Something like that. So it all depends on the time frames you use, the systems you trade, etc. But I mean, from an effective point of view, both are very useful. Okay, just because of my style of trading, I like to see bigger zones and make swing trades. So daily chart is a little bit small for me. I am now back to trading 50-minute charts a little bit. All right, so I might use the daily pivot point 2 at this point, not yet, but it doesn't hurt for intraday trading. You can get the Admiral market indicators by going here. All right, go to admiralmarkets.com, click on platforms, then go to MetaTrader Supreme Edition, then download it for MT4 or MT5 or both, and you can test that. You can download the plugin, it's Supreme Edition. There are a lot of extra features. One of them is the pivot point. But there are others too, as I already showed you, expert advisors indicators that are added, 60 plus in total. And here, if you scroll down, if you're curious about some of them, you can do that. Just scroll down and you see some of them: Global Opinion, Mini Terminal, Trade Terminal, Tick Chart Trader, Real-Time News. Indicators I already mentioned. Here's the pivot point. And many, many more, right? Trading Simulator, etc. I don't want to bore you, so I'll stop at that. But you see a lot of extra features. So just go to Platforms, MetaTrader Supreme Edition. Any other questions? So this is how I use pivot points. There are specific systems available, I'm sure, that are tailor-made or highly reliant on pivot points. Me personally, I just use it as a tool of confluence, as a tool of analysis, and it helps me determine the space, the zone, uh, resistance and support levels, the trend. That's how I use it. But there are specific systems that say, okay, wait for that and that at this and this pivot point entry is that, there and there. I am more of a pattern trader, so that's what I'm waiting for. Wave patterns, general chart patterns, candlestick patterns. I'm a pattern trader, so I trade those patterns. But the pivot points helps me organize my analysis and helps me find better pattern trades, right? But if you're more of a, let's say, system trader in a way, right? Then there are systems that are, I'm sure there are some systems that are really highly dependent on pivot points and very rules based, all right? Or you can develop one yourself, of course. Also possible. I don't use it that rules based. I just use it for understanding the market structure, understanding the charts in a better way. Yeah, it is recorded. Should be uploaded soon. All right. So I guess that's it then. No further questions, I believe. For more webinars, of course, feel free to go to education and click on Forex and CFD webinars. You can sign up for next week and the week after, etc. Every week there are plenty of webinars available. We also have courses here on the right, as you can see. Some of them are for beginners, like Forex 101. If you feel a little bit more past the beginner stage, you could try Zero to Hero. There's Masters of Trading webinars, so a lot of good stuff there. And of course, feel free to check out all of these tabs. On the left, you have info about how to trade, what to trade, etc. And on the right, you have more info about analysis and education. All right, wish you all great trading and a great weekend. Cheers.